Well, hey, y'all. Welcome back to Solid Rock. And I just want to say, don't let anyone ever tell you God doesn't have a sense of humor, because tonight we're doing a message that's basically about unexpected things coming up, and that's exactly where we're at. I am coming to you from the local library because right now there's no power where we normally do this, and we're having to totally make things up, but I think it's working. And so give us a thumbs up, let us know you can see what's going on, and we're going to roll with it. Because today is, you guys probably know by now, Solid Rock is already, it's not your average church. And this is some of the weird things that come up with meeting on a Thursday instead of Sunday, because this is kind of our Mother's Day message. And for you dudes out there that had totally forgotten it was Mother's Day, you're welcome. You've got a couple days left to try to scrape something together and celebrate your mom or your kid's mom or whoever it is you need to celebrate. You can still pull that off. But give me about half an hour before you go rushing out and trying to do it. But this is not your average Mother's Day message, because I'm not your average pastor. We're not your average church. And like I said, things aren't even going the way we normally do it. So we're going to roll with it and see what we have from all this, because God is clearly trying to show that he works in any and every circumstance. And with that, I'm going to pray that we can get through this one. Lord, thank you for bringing us through everything. And I thank you for giving us the tools and the resources to even be able to pivot and improvise. And I pray that you will help all of that stuff to fall aside and just let your message come through. Don't let anything of my own hangups from being stressed enough. Don't let my own ideas even come through. But I pray that your message will reach the people you want it to speak to. Amen. So if you've been with us, we're in a series on favorite stories from the Bible, usually from a kid's Bible. And this week we're on Daniel in the Lion's Den, which might seem like an odd choice for Mother's Day. And I agree with you. But when I started looking at it through that lens, I found so much in here that is totally relevant to the life and just the job of being a mom. Now, in case you couldn't guess, I've never been a mom, but I had a mom. I had a really good mom, and she's probably watching right now. Hey, Mom, love you. And my son has a great mom. She's right over there. And so I've been able to observe moms, and that's the kind of perspective I bring to it, because honestly, I can see things of a good mom. I see what moms go through. And since we come to the Bible observing and seeing what happens in these stories, it all kind of fits together. And so this story is about Daniel. And let me just take a minute to set the scene on it. I don't want to get stuck in this part, but you need to know who Daniel is. Daniel was, he's a Hebrew, he's from Jerusalem, but when he was young, people think probably a teenager, Israel was conquered by Babylon and he was taken prisoner. And so he was taken, it's not like, sometimes it reads like, oh, he was in the service of the king. He was a slave. Let's not mince any words about it. He was enslaved, he was indoctrinated in their culture, he was more than likely castrated, and he was given a new name to try to squash his identity. It's pretty safe to say life isn't going according to his plan. And honestly, that's one of the first places that we can identify to moms with this, because plenty of moms out there, things don't go according to their plan. It's not even just like, oh, I wasn't expecting to have a kid and this caught me off guard. It can be, you were totally aiming to have a kid, but it didn't come when you wanted to. Like sometimes it came earlier, sometimes it took years longer than you expected. Sometimes you had this whole idea in your head of what it was going to be like and what kids you were going to have and stuff, and it's not how it works out. And so we can understand and relate to things not going according to plan. But before we get into today's story, you've got to understand that that whole thing with Daniel being taken prisoner happens when he's a teenager. It goes through, I counted it up, I found 10 different regime changes before we get to this story. It's a total of like at least 83 years. So Daniel, if he was a teenager then, he's in his late 90s at youngest in this story. So don't picture a young man in this. This is a very old dude. He probably doesn't move very fast. He might not hear real well, but he's very wise. He can answer just about any question you throw at him. Because what we first saw from Daniel, that he came and he was determined not to defile himself. That's when he was first taken prisoner. And that's one of the things that set him apart. And as a result of that, and some of the choices he made, you see in Daniel 1:19, the king talked with them and no one impressed them as much as Daniel and his 3 friends. And that's a very important thing. That's another lesson that you can take for a mom or anybody, that today's decisions will matter tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And it was the decision that Daniel had already made, that he would not defile himself. That's what kind of set him up to be in the position where he was. And by the time we get down the line to Daniel chapter 6, that was chapter 1. By the time you get to chapter 6, like I said, it's been 83 years at least, and a bunch of different times power has changed hands. Several of those were being conquered from the outside. Several of those were being overthrown from the inside. In both of those situations, standard practice is to kill off everybody who was in the old administration, but Daniel is kept around. That's how respected this guy is. And you'll see that in chapter 6, Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. And because of Daniel's great ability, the new king, his name's Darius. I can only picture Darius Rucker, so he is King Hootie to me. I'm certain his name isn't even pronounced Darius, but that's how I say it. You're going to have to get used to it. But the king made plans to place Daniel over the entire empire. And this is one of the great things about Daniel. It's his experience was so noticeable. Like I said, he's an old man at this point. And no one's going like, boy, look at this young up-and-comer. He's a guy that's been through some stuff. And that's another lesson for moms or anybody, but especially moms. Like, experience is really valuable. To the young moms out there, learn from the old moms. Find somebody who's already raised their kids and they look, kind of like what you hope your kids turn out like someday. And hang out with that lady. Find out what she did right. Find out what she did wrong. She did it in a different time than you, but you can still learn from her. Experience really matters. But so then the king is about to make Daniel like a very important person, but there's other people who Daniel is being chosen instead of them, and they're not happy about it. And so they do what politicians apparently have done for thousands of years, and they decide to do a smear campaign against Daniel. But it's this remarkable statement about him. As they're digging, it says, he was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So they concluded our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. That is an amazing statement because, I like to think I've got a decent track record, but if someone wanted to dig up dirt on me, they could find it. I have not been flawless here, but Daniel apparently served in all these different kings, different rulers from different cultures, and so faithfully that they couldn't find a thing on him. And that's amazing. And so the lesson there is just cling to God, because everything else is negotiable. Daniel went he's serving the Babylonians, and then they're conquered by the Persians. All right, he's serving the Persians. And then for a little while, a Babylonian heir rose up and took power again. And he's like, all right, back to them. He was able to be flexible and pivot to all these different things. But the one thing that was constant through his life was his devotion to God. And cling to God, everything else can change, and it will change sooner or later. But so these guys who are trying to discredit Daniel are like, well, the only thing we've got is his religion. And so let's use that. They come to King Hootie with the dumbest idea ever and tell him, give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, oh, you amazing guy, you, will be thrown into the den of lions. Darius falls for this, and I have no idea why. Does anybody want that? Especially, I think the moms can understand. You get, hammered with enough questions day in, day out, all day long. And it's like, mom. Do you really want everybody in your entire kingdom, which, by the way, spans the entire known world, to only be able to come to you for things for an entire month? That sounds awful. But Darius is like, you know what? I am important. We should do that. And goes ahead with it. And it works out exactly like Daniel's enemies were hoping it would. That you see, when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem. And he prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. This is the guy who was so faithful throughout 10 different kings that they couldn't find a single thing to accuse him on. But the moment this law is passed, he defies it without hesitation. As soon as it's a choice between his king or his God, he doesn't even have to question it. He doesn't even blink. And what I think is also really cool is he doesn't even hide. He goes home and he prays with its windows open. Like, he's not trying to be sneaky. He's not pretending. He is who he is, and he's not going to back down on it. And it's also, he's praying just as he had always done. He's doing what he did as usual, because this was a firmly established track record for Daniel. And that's what made it powerful. That's what made Daniel special, because this is the source of strength and wisdom and patience and love and all the things that a mom needs to make it through a day of being a mom. It comes from the connection to God. That's what Daniel had. That's what he was leaning on. And it was just as he had always done. He's sticking with who he is, what he does. He has built this into himself. It goes back to the earlier point that today's decisions matter tomorrow. He had made the decision a long time ago that he had this relationship with God. He was faithful to him, and he prayed 3 times a day. And that was like a defining characteristic of him, so much that his enemies spotted it without any trouble, and so much that even when it became a question of the law, he didn't have to wonder what was the right thing to do. He knew that this was a non-negotiable, like, firm foundation for him. Mm-hmm. And so then we move from Daniel for a bit, and we see what happens with Darius, what's going on for him. And because, of course, Daniel's enemies, they come and are like, hey, Daniel broke the law, because they're a bunch of tattletales. Moms can relate to that. If you've got more than one kid, you've got a tattletale, I'm sure of it. But they come and they're like, he did what you're not supposed to do. You got to throw him to the lions. And you see, hearing this, the king was deeply troubled, and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. He spent the rest of the day looking for a way to get Daniel out of this predicament. Now, the first thing that's interesting to me is we don't hear a peep from Daniel in that. There's nothing in this of how Daniel's responding. Maybe it's because he's like 100 years old at this point, going, you know what, I've been about to get killed so many times at this point. Whatever. You want to go ahead and kill me? Fine. Like, maybe he just doesn't care. Maybe he's completely confident that God will bring him through. Maybe he's like, you know what, I had a good run. I'm ready to be done now. It could be anything. But Daniel is not like trying to negotiate. He's not pleading for his life. Just Darius is the one who's upset. But notice that he wasn't offended by it. He's not like, how dare Daniel do this? He's upset and he's like, oh no, this rule is going to make Daniel pay. I didn't see that one coming. And that's what bothers him. And he's trying to find a way out, but there isn't one. And so he finally has to go through with it. And that's another lesson that moms often learn, and you need to remember that sometimes the only way out is through. Sometimes there isn't a way to change things. A decision has already been made, something has already happened, and we're stuck in this now. And we can't get out of it. The only way to get out is to go through and trust that God is going to do what God is going to do. Sometimes even you have no idea what that's going to be, but you got to go through it. That's the only option. And so then Darius, like, he has a rough night. They take Daniel, they put him in the lion's den, which apparently is a cave, because it says they roll a big stone over the face of it and they put the official seal on it, so it's like illegal to open it. And Darius is freaking out all night. He can't sleep. And it says very early the next morning, well, hang on, before I get to the next morning, it tells us that Darius spent the night, couldn't sleep, and he's fasting, which some people think like is he praying? Like, we don't, maybe, hard to say, certainly doesn't say so for sure. Nothing in this story ever tells us about Darius worshiping God. And certainly at this point, he's just like, he views it as, well, that's Daniel's God, one of the many other gods. Like, there's Daniel's God, and there's this guy's God, and, I don't know, I'm a king, I might be God myself. But he's just so distraught over Daniel and the circumstances that are going on. And once again, this is another thing that I think moms could relate to. Moms spend plenty of sleepless nights, like taking care of their kids or just laying awake at night worrying about their kids. Sometimes it's for something that's going on. Sometimes it's just for like, am I doing this right? And this is what we see happening, that Darius has made a decision. And only in hindsight did he realize that was probably not a great idea. And now someone I love is in danger, could go wrong for a person that I care about, that I deeply respect. And he tried so hard to change it, but he couldn't. And now he's just, distraught and laying awake and can't sleep and doesn't know what's going to happen. Once again, we have no idea what's going on for Daniel. He doesn't tell us. It's so weird. I mean, this is in the book of Daniel. Daniel's the one that wrote this down, and he tells us what it was like for Darius, not for him. Then we can see, very early the next morning, the king got up and hurried out to the lion's den, because apparently the sentence was you had to spend a night in there, and they just assumed you would die. I'm not sure, but by morning, he's able to go check on him. When he got there, he called out in anguish, "Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you serve so faithfully able to rescue you from the lions?" Now, for starters, it's interesting to me. He calls him servant of the living God, which is like kind of implying that that's the distinction. This is the living God. The other gods are, they're not living. They're just idols. They're statues. I don't know. Is he saying that? But it's also like, servant of the living God. Was your God able to save you from the lions? It's like, your God is real, but I'm not sure if he's stronger than a lion. And it's like, it's this weird thing of Darius is starting to recognize that there's something more to Daniel's God than there is to the other ones that he sees around him. And notice that 2 different times he emphasizes Daniel's relationship to God. He's like the servant of the living God and the God you serve so faithfully. This was Daniel's defining characteristic. Everybody could see it in him. And that's another great point to learn, that people without faith can see yours lived out.
Yes.
And that's the message. Like, you don't have to be a weirdo like me going and preaching messages on the internet or in person to anybody. Living your life. We have no record of Daniel ever preaching a message. Mm-hmm. But here we are thousands of years later, learning the lessons from Daniel's life. And he didn't come and say, "Darius, you need to serve my God," but he served him faithfully himself. And Darius saw that in him, and it made an impression. That people can see your faith lived out. And people can tell if it's just words you say or if it's real. That's what made Daniel so noteworthy, that it was so obvious that this is everything of who Daniel is. And that just stood out so much. And so, but I also think it's really funny that Darius comes saying, "Was your God able to save you from the lions?" Because I just picture God listening to that and going, "Bro, do you have any idea who you're talking about? I made those lions. Lions are not intimidating to me. I got this." And that's about what Daniel says. As soon as the slide will advance. Cool. But naturally, Daniel is fine. And Daniel answers, "Long live the king. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me." Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. And this just makes me nuts. I'm going to talk to Daniel when I meet him in heaven. And it's give me the rest of this story. What did that actually look like? We get one line. Angel shut the lions' mouths. Okay. Was it this ferocious night of lions constantly attacking and there's this mighty angel battling them off all night in this epic struggle? Or did the lions attack and an angel showed up and smacked him so hard on the first time that the lions spent the rest of the night cowering in the corner? Or did he come and go Shazam to the lions and they turned into cuddly little kittens and snuggled with Daniel all night? I mean, according to every children's Bible I've ever seen, that's the story. You always have these, big lions looking strangely effeminate and cuddling with Daniel. Nothing tells us that they cuddled with him. It just says that they didn't attack him. And because an angel didn't let them. I want to know what that looked like. To give Daniel a little bit of credit, he was sealed in a cave in the middle of the night. There was no light in there. He probably didn't know what was going on. He heard some scuffling and roaring, but I'm still here, so I guess it's okay. Or maybe an angel showed up and he lit up the cave. Again, I wish I knew. He didn't tell us. But there's also part of the story that is in here, but you probably don't remember it if you learned this one as a kid, because we never tell this one to kids. It's not in the kids' Bibles. It wasn't on the little flannel graph thing when I was in Sunday school. because we don't put this picture up. All of the guys who had accused Daniel and who had set this whole thing up, they then get thrown to the lions. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what law they broke. Maybe it was just like, hey, you set yourself up against Daniel and his God, and he clearly won, so that means you lose. Here you go. Let's see if your God can do it too. And I'm not sure, but they get thrown into the lions with their wives and children, by the way. Like, Darius doesn't mess around. And that's just like, yep, there we go. Got that taken care of. Moving on. But then Darius is astounded by this, and he sends a message out. It actually says, just like one verse before this, that it says he sent this message to every race and nation and language throughout the world. For starters, that's the scope of Darius's kingdom. But also, this message is going to everybody. And this is what he says: I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel. That's not commanding worship, but it is saying, don't mess with him. Like, he's legit. And it says, for he is the living God, and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his rule will never end. Remember, we talked about how Daniel has been here through the reigns of at least 10 different kings. Darius is one of them. And he's fully aware that, like, well, I conquered the last guy, and sooner or later, like, someone might conquer me, or I might get overthrown by one of my trusted people, or at the very least, I'll eventually die and maybe pass on the throne to my son or something. It's like Darius knows full well that his reign is going to come to an end. And that's why he's just so much emphasizing, like, he's the living God. He will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed. His rule will never end. This has made an impression on Darius. Once again, we don't know for sure that Darius started worshiping God, but we do know that he has been impressed by this. It has made a change in him. And I love that it's just showing, once again, things are changing. Daniel's been through so much change, and this is another one. Like, I don't think that Darius's reign is the same after this event as it was before. Things have changed in him, and he already respected Daniel, but there's a whole new level to it now, I have no doubt. And once again, this just comes back to the idea, like, a mom's role is constantly changing. That you start out with a newborn, and they have their own needs, and trying to get them to sleep, and just like are they developing right? Are they the right weight and length ratio and all these kind of things? But then they get a little older, and now they're starting to be mobile, and it's like, oh, they're falling down? They get hurt? Are they okay? And it's like we're worrying about nutrition, and are they developing, and they're in school, and like, are they learning well, and are they making friends, and are they being bullied? And you have so many things. And then as they get older, they're becoming teenagers. I haven't gotten to that point myself, so I can't say a whole lot about it, but I can guarantee that it's a lot different than taking care of a toddler. And then I can also tell you that the job doesn't stop when they turn 18 or graduate from high school or something. You're still their mom forever. And so then you switch to parenting an adult child, and that's a whole different thing. And the job is constantly changing, but the job never goes away. And it's just one of these things that God is constant through it all. That all of the stuff in every different season, God is the source of the strength and the patience and the wisdom that you need for that season. And he's already fully aware of the next season and what it's going to take there. And your decisions in this season are setting up how that one's going to go. Now, that doesn't mean like, and you better have gotten it right, or you're hosed now, like you've got no hope for the future. But it's like, that's what he does. Redemption is a real thing. And so he can take whatever you're starting with, and he can always you can start today to move forward into a better direction. You can make a decision today that's going to have an impact in the future. And that's the beauty of the story. That's what we see in Daniel's story, is just a whole thing of stuff not going according to plan. Daniel did not plan to get taken captive as a teenager, to be here throughout 10 different kings, to go through some crazy stuff in between chapters 1 and 6. But then you get to this as an old man to like be sold out because he's faithful to God. That doesn't seem fair, but he is. And he actually gets a death sentence assigned to him, and they throw him to the lions. Did he expect to come back out of there? I don't know. He didn't tell us, but he does come back out. And just all of these things, so many unknowns, so many questions, and just going through the whole thing, stepping forward one step at a time, saying, all right, Lord, here I am. I'm taking this next step. Oh, they made it illegal to pray to you, but I can't function without you, so I'm still with you. And he just keeps going. And the thing that impressed everyone, his enemies and his allies, was Daniel is faithful to God. He served him so faithfully. That's what made all the difference. Now, to take this a little bit broader scope, to more than just the moms, we can see among Bible nerds and theologians, Daniel is famous for foreshadowing Jesus in a number of ways. I'll just show you a couple of them. But first of all, I told you how Daniel was taken captive to a foreign land, and he had to serve a foreign king. Jesus left heaven to come to earth, which is very much a foreign land for him, and came to serve us. So they're both leaving where they're from and become a servant. Then, there we go. Daniel's enemies tried, but had no way to accuse him other than his relationship with his God. They were digging, they were trying to come up with something against him. Jesus had enemies, and they tried to accuse him, and they couldn't find anything. Like, that's, again, so amazing. He stood in front of a crowd once and said, who here can accuse me of sin? And no one could. An impressive claim. And they had nothing that they could accuse him over except for his relationship with the Father. I almost skipped the most important one. Daniel received a death sentence, was sealed in a cave with a stone, and came back out unharmed. Jesus was given a death sentence, was sealed in a tomb with a stone, and he emerged resurrected to new life. Like, this is the story. This is what God is doing. This is what he did through Daniel. It's what he did through Jesus. And the life of Daniel, this story here, is not just about, cuddling with oversized cats. It's about God has a plan. And it's part of showing that he knew the plan from the beginning. No matter how much things seemed to go off track, he knew what he was doing. He was in it all along. And it all comes back and hinges on that question that Darius asked. He's like, was your God able to save you? And exactly what God would have said to him then, it echoes clear down to us now. And it's like, yes, God is willing and able to save anyone who calls on him. And that's the question. Will you call on him? And so, like I tell you every week, if you're ready to call on him, if this is something that you need in your life, and we all need it in our lives, I promise you, but if you need some help with that, you can call on Jesus. It doesn't have to be hard. Just tell him, Jesus, I need you in my life. I don't want to live my way. I want to live yours. That's enough. If you need some help taking some more steps on that, you can text the word rooted to 865-864-0043. And this will give you a connection to a real person who can help you take your next steps and get started in the first few weeks of really putting this into practice like Daniel did, making it part of your life so that it can carry you through all of the ups and downs that are sure to come. With that, let me pray for us. Lord, I just thank you for guiding us in all of the things that we don't know are coming, but you do. And I pray that you will help us to take your lessons deep into our hearts and let them define us so that it can carry us, but also other people can see your work through us and that you can be glorified in the good times and the bad. Amen. Thanks, y'all. Have a good week.